The email landed just after 5 on a Friday, burying itself in the inboxes of Brisbane's First Nations elders like a spear. It wasn't just a bureaucratic decision, it was a rejection, a dismissal of generations of knowledge, a direct message that a sacred site, a place of profound spiritual connection, would be bulldozed. Imagine receiving that news, knowing that the earth your ancestors walked, the stories whispered through the gum trees, the very essence of your culture, was about to be ripped apart for a swimming pool. The Federal Environment Minister Murray Watt had decided against an emergency declaration under the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act. No immediate halt. The bulldozers already rumbling on the horizon of Victoria Park would continue their inexorable advance. For the Yuggera and Turrbal people, it was more than just a piece of land, it was a living library, a ceremonial ground, a birthing place and a burial site. And now the government had effectively signed its demolition warrant for the 2032 Brisbane Olympics. This wasn't just about a stadium, it was about the very soul of a city and the custodians who had cared for it for millennia. Meet Uncle Jim, a Yuggera elder with a laugh as warm as a Queensland summer but eyes that carried the weight of his people's history. He'd spent his life sharing the stories of Meanjin, Brisbane, with anyone willing to listen, from wide-eyed schoolchildren to international delegates. His family had always known Victoria Park, a vast green expanse just north of the city's heart, as Barrambin. It was where the women gathered for ceremony, where children learned to hunt and gather, where trade routes converged. For Uncle Jim, Barrambin wasn't just a park on a map, it was his grandmother's garden, his ancestors' meeting place, a place imprinted with the lore of the land. His neighbor Auntie Susan, a Turrbal elder, echoed his sentiments. She recalled stories passed down through her mother of the spiritual significance of the ancient trees, the way the land itself spoke of creation and belonging. These weren't just abstract concepts, they were the bedrock of their identity, their connection to country. Their lives, lived quietly in the outer rings of Brisbane, were deeply intertwined with this ancient landscape. They were proud Australians, but their pride was rooted in an understanding of this land that predated any flag or anthem. The incident itself had been brewing for years, a slow-motion collision between ancient heritage and modern ambition. When Brisbane was awarded the 2032 Olympic Games, a wave of excitement and unfortunately a fair bit of unchecked development swept through the city. Victoria Park, or Barrambin, was earmarked for a massive new aquatic centre and a significant part of the Olympic infrastructure. The state government, driven by the perceived economic boom and the glory of the Games, pushed ahead with plans. Initial consultations with First Nations groups were from the perspective of the traditional owners. Superficial at best and dismissive at worst. Uncle Jim and Auntie Susan, alongside other elders, voiced their concerns early and often. They presented archaeological evidence, anthropological reports and compelling oral histories, detailing the immense cultural significance of Barrambin. They spoke of songlines, ceremonial grounds and burial sites. They weren't against the Olympics, they were simply asking for respect, for a proper assessment, for the protection of what was irreplaceable. They proposed alternative locations, ways to integrate the existing cultural landscape into the new development, but their pleas seemed to fall on deaf ears. Construction began, a symbolic chipping away at the very ground they held sacred. The roar of machinery in the distance was a constant grating reminder of the impending loss. Finally, in an act of desperation and as a last resort, applications were formally made to the Federal Environment Minister under the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act. This was their last legal defence, a desperate attempt to use Australian law to protect Australian heritage. They pleaded for an emergency declaration, a temporary halt to allow for a comprehensive, respectful assessment. The clock was ticking and the bulldozers were getting closer. The legal battle, if it could even be called that, felt less like a contest of arguments and more like a bureaucratic steamroller. The applications under the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act were carefully prepared, meticulously detailing the spiritual, historical, and archaeological significance of Barrambin. The elders, supported by legal aid and community organisations, presented evidence of continuous occupation, of specific ceremonial practices, and of the unique connection their people held to that particular stretch of land. They argued that the proposed development would cause irreversible damage not just to the physical landscape, but to the cultural integrity and spiritual well-being of the Yuggera and Turrbal people. They spoke of the importance of maintaining cultural continuity, of teaching the next generation about their sacred sites, and of the devastating impact of having those sites destroyed. They cited the very purpose of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act: to protect and preserve areas and objects of particular significance. The Minister, Murray Watt, was tasked with considering whether the proposed action would cause significant damage to an area of cultural heritage and whether an emergency declaration was warranted. The stakes were immense: the future of a sacred site versus the relentless march of Olympic development. The arguments put forward by the government centered on the economic benefits of the Olympics, the advanced stage of planning, and the assertion that they were undertaking sufficient cultural heritage surveys despite the strong objections from traditional owners. It became clear that the decision wouldn't be purely legal, it would be profoundly political. Weighing the perceived benefits of a global sporting event against the deeply held rights and heritage of the first peoples of this land. In the end, the decision came down cold and final. Minister Watt declined to issue an emergency declaration. The immediate protection sought by the Yuggera and Turrbal elders was denied. While the minister did not rule out longer-term protections, this was cold comfort when the immediate threat of bulldozers loomed. The outcome for Uncle Jim and Auntie Susan felt like a profound betrayal. They hadn't asked for the moon, they had simply asked for the protection of their sacred country, a fair go for their heritage. The bulldozers rolled on. What did they get? A promise of further consultation perhaps, but the core of their plea, an immediate halt to prevent destruction, was ignored. Was justice served? For the traditional owners, absolutely not. It felt like a decision that prioritized bricks and mortar and the fleeting glory of a sporting event over the enduring spiritual and cultural fabric of a nation. It was a compromise certainly, but one where the burden of compromise fell squarely on those who had already given so much. The outcome left a bitter taste, a stark reminder that even with specific legislation like the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act, the path to protecting Indigenous heritage in Australia can be fraught with political expediency and a lack of genuine understanding. This story unfolding in the heart of Brisbane holds profound implications for all Australians. It highlights a critical tension between development and heritage, and it lays bare the ongoing struggle for First Nations communities to protect their sacred sites. If you're an Australian, it's crucial to understand that laws like the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Heritage Protection Act exist for a reason. They are designed to protect unique and